Hi, everybody. Thank you for hopping on tonight. My name is Megan Nally. We'll get started in a few minutes, but for now, we're just going to wait for some other folks to join, so sit tight. Alrighty, I think it's a good time to get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for Urban Development and Community Resilience in Roxbury. My name is Megan Nally, as I mentioned, and I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator here at the Leventhal Map Center. I'm joined by our Head Curator and President, Garrett-Nelson. Hi, Garrett.
Hi, Megan. Hi, everyone out there.
For those who are unfamiliar with the Map Center, we are an independent research and education center located at the Boston Public Library. As such, we oversee the library's collection of geographic objects, which is roughly 250,000 maps, atlases, globes, surveys, plans, and puzzles. And as part of our jobs, we put on exhibitions every 6 to 8 months using the collection objects. And tonight's talk is the second in our latest kind of exhibition theme series called Continued Conversations. In this series, we'll be chatting with folks who work in the geographic and issue areas of the current exhibition. That exhibition is titled More or Less in Common, Environment and Justice in the Human Landscape, where we're looking at the geographic relationship between environmental management and historic patterns of injustice on the local, national, and global scale. For those who are local to Boston, the physical exhibition will be up on display at the Central Library in Copley Square through December. And then for those who are unable to come in person, we invite you to visit the digital exhibition, which is on our website. Before we begin tonight's program, I do just want to take note of the complicated and contested threads that are woven through historical geography, including difficult stories that we neither can nor should ignore. The place that we now call Boston is the ancestral and current home to Indigenous peoples, including the Mashpee and Aquinnah-Wampanoag tribes, the Nipmuc Nations, and the descendants of the Massachusetts people. Copley Square, where the library is located, sits on top of a filled tidal estuary that once featured some of the most advanced marine agricultural techniques in North America. The maps in our collections bear witness not only to histories of colonial expropriation, but also to conflicts ranging from labor struggles to racial segregation. And in some cases, these maps don't simply document the stories, but actually played a role in making them happen in the first place. During tonight's program and all of our programs, we encourage you to all consider how these histories still exert real effects on the present day. And then jumping in for tonight's conversation, we are so thrilled to be joined by folks from the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. The Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative is a community-based planning and organizing group for the Dudley neighborhood spanning parts of Roxbury and North Dorchester. Since its formation in 1984, DSNI has acted as a vehicle for residents to exercise neighborhood control and ensure access to resources through prioritizing development without displacement and community power. We'll be hearing a lot more about the work that they've been up to for the last 38 years. But before that, please join me in welcoming DSNI's Director of Community Organizing, René Mardones, and DNI's past project and operations manager, Minnie McMahon. Hi, Minnie. Hi, René. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us today.
Of course, our pleasure. Yeah. To start off tonight's conversation, I thought it would be helpful if we talk through some of the kind of more contemporary maps that are on DSNI's website. So to kind of look at us geographically to what we're talking about. So let me pull this up. Great. While we're doing this, Minnie and René, feel free to jump in at any point because you obviously have a lot more knowledge than I do on these topics. So this first map is, there we go. This first map is kind of comparing the geographic place that we're looking to in reference to the rest of the city of Boston. So the Dudley neighborhood, as I mentioned, is located spanning parts of Dorchester or North Dorchester and Roxbury. And then on this map, it appears in this kind of royal blue color. If we zoom out or zoom in a bit more, excuse me, this map depicts two entities that are going to be particularly important for tonight's conversation. In this black outline, we're seeing the Dudley Village campus, and then in this blue or royal blue outline, we're seeing the DNI Land Trust. And while we're here, Renee and Minnie, I'd love if you could maybe talk us through the difference between these two entities. So what's the Dudley Village campus? What's the Dudley Triangle? How they're related? And for those who may not be familiar, what even is a land trust? Maybe in a more simple explanation.
Sure. So Renee and I are unmuting at the same time. I'll give it a go. The Dudley Village campus delineates our organization's kind of catchment area. So this is the residents, the communities, the populations that we organize, work with, do community planning with and for. And within the Dudley Triangle, which is this much smaller area, that is the area over which DSNI got the power of eminent domain back in the late 1980s. So we, DNI, the Dudley Neighbors Incorporated, the Community Land Trust at Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, most of our land is within the Dudley Triangle because, and I think we're going to get into this more later, most of our CLT land is concentrated within the Triangle. That's the place where we had the legal right to acquire land from private sellers at that time. But some of our land is also outside of the Triangle, but within the larger campus. And briefly, a community land trust is a not-for-profit organization that owns and stewards land for permanent community use. So we own the land, but we lease it out to homeowners, to renters, to community gardeners, we have some commercial properties as well. So the idea is we own the land, we remove it from the private market, we sort of take away the transactional value of the land and really uphold the use value and lease it out at affordable rates for various community amenities.
Great, thank you so much. This next duo, and this is the final duo that I'll talk about, and I'll hand it over to Garrett to give us more of a kind of historic and geographic background. This was on the DSNI's website, and we thought it was really interesting because you can very clearly see the historic vacant lands in this black blocking color, and then compared to today, how those vacant lands have been taken over and are now under domain of DNI. And we'll, as Minnie said, talk a little bit more later about what this looks like on a everyday kind of level. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Garrett to talk about kind of what the neighborhood had looked like in past. We're going to talk about late 19th century all the way up until today. So I'm going to take everybody else off the screen and we'll hand it over to Garrett.
Great, thanks, Megan. I'm just going to bring a couple of slides up, and everything that I'm going to show is from both the Map Centers and the Boston Public Library's digital collections. We're really lucky to have an amazing set of digital resources here at the library, which you, of course, are invited to explore on your own time after the talk. These digital collections also are featured in the companion digital exhibition to More or Less in Common. So as Megan said, we'd love to have you down to the Central Library at any time to see the exhibition in person and to think more about long historical patterns of environmental injustice and justice. If you can't get down to the Central Library, we have created this really great digital companion piece, which you can access from our website, leventhalmap.org. So we really, the kind of core of tonight's show is our colleagues from DSNI. So I want to make sure that they have plenty of time to talk. But as a prelude to sort of thinking about what that group has done over the past nearly 4 decades, I just wanted to say a few things about how the maps in our collection help us kind of think about the long-term trajectories of land use and development in Boston. And that's something we've really emphasized in the current exhibition. You can't properly understand struggles over neighborhood control and community development and environmental inequities in the city without, in some cases, going back hundreds of years and thinking about how spatial differences have accumulated over many, many decades and centuries of urban change. So what you're seeing here is actually a map that will be familiar if anybody tuned in about a month and a half ago to a conversation we had with Byron Rushing and Yawo Miller about the shifting boundaries of the town, later city of Roxbury, which was eventually annexed into Boston. And we now think of Roxbury as a neighborhood of Boston. But I'm showing this map because, of course, the Dudley Triangle and the Dudley neighborhood really straddled the historic boundary between Roxbury and Dorchester. And we can see some of that on this map. So this map stretches all the way from on the east side here. This is actually the Back Bay. So the BPL used to be in the historic boundaries of Roxbury, all the way west to the Charles River. This is what's now today West Roxbury. But if you zoom in over here, where most of the 19th century, middle 19th century development in Roxbury was, you can see this kind of historic pattern of where the kind of colonial era and then later 19th century American city was starting to develop. And what I really want to call your attention to is the way that this sort of border area between Roxbury and Dorchester was historically this kind of literally marginal space. In the exhibition, we talk a lot about how marginality, being on the edge of something, is oftentimes some of the places where, for instance, undesirable land uses like industrial toxins or dumping grounds are located, and how social inequalities are often perpetuated by moving certain populations into those same spaces. In this case, what was called Line Brook that made up the border line between Dorchester and Roxbury was a low-lying brook that fed into this tidal estuary. This is South Bay right here. And just a couple of landmarks that you'll recognize today. Here's Magazine Street. This is on the map is labeled as Eustis Street, but you can see Adams Street cuts across it right here. And so this is essentially Dudley Town Common, and the Dudley neighborhood stretches out in this direction, the Dudley Triangle. But it was peripheral to the 19th century city, and in that kind of marginal space between Dorchester and Roxbury, this kind of unique sort of neighborhood grew up. Just to give you a little bit of sense of what that map looks like on a modern map of Boston, here it is rotated on top of a modern map. So I'm going to jump really quickly from that mid-19th century map of Roxbury into the 20th century, many decades after both Roxbury and Dorchester are annexed into the city of Boston, and to show a couple of maps that kind of illustrate the situation of neighborhood renewal after World War II. Many of these maps are from the BPL's really amazing collection of planning documents that came to us either from the Boston Redevelopment Authority or other city planning agencies. This map is not BRA. This is actually a 1960 map by the Boston Settlement Council. It comes from a book studying Boston housing conditions in 1960. And this is actually, the original is on display in the exhibition right now. And one of the things I flipped through these pages accidentally. One of the things we look at in the exhibition is the way that the sort of post-war situation of housing in Boston. So this map shows quality of housing. The white areas are conservation, so that would be protected. Hashed areas are rehabilitation, and the solid red are redevelopment. These are the areas that were targeted for clearance and what was called slum removal and redevelopment through post-war financing programs through the power of the redevelopment state. And you can see this kind of like spine of what was considered substandard housing running from the South Cove, Chinatown neighborhood, down through right here is basically Dudley Triangle, and then up into lower and upper Roxbury. This was targeted by the city in the post-war period as a site of needing both federal and city intervention in redeveloping housing markets. You can see how that played out in practice here. This is the GNRP, which is the General Neighborhood Renewal Plan published by the BRA. So this is a set of 8 maps that we're studying the neighborhood. And what's kind of interesting here is, so this inner dotted line, this is the Washington Park redevelopment area. We look at that quite a bit in the exhibition. It was a site of huge redevelopment efforts. This is right here, Dudley, today Nubian Square. And this area was set aside as a named renewal district for the BRA. By contrast, over here, so this is the Dudley Triangle, was also studied as part of the same neighborhood renewal plan, but it wasn't named as one of the redevelopment areas. And it therefore followed a kind of different pattern of development that flows directly into what DSNI is founded to do, in a slightly different model of neighborhood renewal. I'm just going to show these last 2 pieces very briefly as a bit of a taster of what sorts of community history records are located here at the BPL that we'd love to have people to look more at and to think with. This is a 1986 Roxbury Neighborhood Housing Initiative plan, as the city began to think about decent and affordable housing built by the community for Roxbury residents. So this is a government document, but that indicates, around the very same time that DSNI is starting to pioneer the use of community land trusts, the importance of directing community control over redevelopment. And there's a number of maps in this piece, most of which are actually closer to the Washington Park neighborhood, but show sites targeted for redevelopment and infill. And then finally, this urban design framework plan, this is more recent, from 1991, continues to show how the city was thinking about redeveloping. Again, we're not looking at DNI proper here. This is over in what's Dudley, now Nubian Square, the site of the BPL's beautiful new Roxbury branch, which you should all visit if you haven't had a chance yet. But these kinds of maps are really instrumental in thinking about land use planning and thinking about who has the power to do community and urban development. And that's the story that we want to kind of shift towards in thinking about how DNI historically and then present has made this not just map making power, but the actual capacity to do neighborhood change, what you might think of as environmental management on a community scale, a very participatory citizen-led process. So I'm going to leave those historic maps there. We can come back to them, Renee and Minnie, if you'd like to reference any of them. But we wanted to turn it over to you now to talk more, basically pick up that story and tell us about how DSNI got to be where it is and how you think about environmental justice as being part of your work.
Thank you, Garrett, for that overview. And so as we was saying before, Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative was created in 1984. The reason why DSNI was created was because the community have the need to come together. At that time, a lot of redlining was happening in the area, in the city. A lot of disinvestment in Roxbury. People were facing, arsoning for profit. So, landlords who couldn't, sell their property was, setting those home on fire. So a lot of empty land there, vacant lots where, construction company were coming and dumping trash. There were a number of, illegal transfer station in the community. So Dudley neighbors, Dudley Street neighbors came together and decides to, take action. They start putting some pressure on the city, and they were able to close some of those stations. At the same time, the community was like, "Oh, we have to take a stand on the land. We want to control the process of land use." And in 1989, the city of Boston give the power of eminent domain. At the same time, the organization decides to create another organization that can run this process. And DNI, Dudley Neighborhood Incorporated, was created. The mission of the organization has been, to empower Dudley residents to organize, plan for, and create a control a vibrant, diverse, and highly quality neighborhood in collaboration with other local grassroots organization. So I think, till today, we see that most of the process that DSNI, together with DNI in some cases, and other local nonprofit do, is to incorporate, the resident in this community planning process. We actually, with Mini, we're talking this past week, or this week, of today is Wednesday, right? About a community process in one of the site that is empty. This is Dudley and Brook Avenue in Roxbury. Oh, that is the Dorchester side of the triangle, right? So we're in the process of designing this community process together with the Department of Neighborhood Development, DND, City of Boston. And it has been, this has been the model that we have been used for years, right? It was another community process in Columbia Road that Mini can give more details. That took some years. Is a former Citizen Banks in Dudley Street and Columbia Road. Columbia Road is that the street? And we're in the process of designing with the developer and the community what is going to be there. Mini, you want to give a little brief overviews how was that process, because that took a few years to get to where we are right now?
Sure. Yeah, I'll say that in terms of land use, how do we decide what goes where? That seems to be a negotiation, right, between the community with DSNI as a facilitator, convener, and the city. And throughout our history, I think we've had, starting in early days with really pushing the city, and then, in certainly seeing today the city as a real partner with us, who works with us. The land that we end up, historically, that we've acquired, has the public land that we've acquired, has the city comes to us. We have an agreement. We have a memorandum of understanding. They actually pledged public land within the triangle to the organization. So the city will come to us and say, here's this land. It's up for disposition. We want to get rid of it, the city, and it's going to come through you. And then there's community process around how that land is going to get used, but typically falling within zoning. For the Columbia Road building, which is a big commercial building that is going to get redeveloped, we've designated a developer after a many-year community process about, hey, what do folks want to see here? What would be the best use of this building? A many-year process that was in partnership with the city. The city actually, the mayor, former Mayor Walsh, designated Upham's Corner as a pilot project in the city's first comprehensive city plan in several years. Designated Upham's Corner as a pilot area for development without displacement. And it also became the Upham's Corner as an arts and innovation district. And the city actually approached us. There are 2 lots that are controlled by the city, or 2 sites that are controlled by a city. And then a third, and the city actually approached us and said, would you like to acquire this site? and have permanent control over it, and work together with the publicly owned sites to help realize this vision of development without displacement in Upham's and creating this arts and innovation district. So I will say that is still very much underway.
So Renee and Minnie, I'd love to ask you a kind of broad pitch question, which is how you think about your work as relating to environmental questions. One of the things that we talk about in our exhibition is that we want people to think about the environment not just as like trees and water and birds and things like that, but as really a social question about where do people live, who gets to live where, housing affordability, control over community development. There's one of the reasons that I started with that Roxbury map and showing Line Brook running on the line between Roxbury and Dorchester is the Dudley neighborhood is actually the site of one of the very first kind of attempts in the 1980s to think about environmental planning in urban neighborhoods. And a landscape architect, Anne Spirn, who's now at MIT, began working with DNI. And it was one of the first moments where landscape architects as a profession started thinking about coming back into cities and working with community groups. That's a story that we tell in More or Less in Common, which is targeted to the 200th anniversary of Frederick Law Olmsted's birth. We think about landscape planning in the city in places like Emerald Necklace, how it eventually becomes a contributor to unequal development as places like the elite suburbs are the ones that kind of get the most extensive investments in green infrastructure. But then how, starting in the 80s with the environmental justice movement, Anne Spirn's article about Dudley is one of the first to kind of redirect attention back to environmental planning in urban neighborhoods. And one of the things that she was thinking about is, what about this brook that used to be there? What about this low-lying brook that was filled in and it caused flooding? And how do we think about environmental management in that neighborhood? So for you all, both like, as representatives of DSNI's work over the past 4 decades, as well as in the present day, how do you think about environmental issues as being a part both of your institution, but also your constituents, the people who you're working for and with, and does that resonate?
I really appreciate all of that framing. I think one of the really exciting things about Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative and the community that created DSNI, and that is the lifeblood of DSNI, is that our concern is well-being of the neighborhood, for people in the neighborhood. It's economic well-being, it's educational well-being, it's quality of life. So, and this is true of many of mission-oriented organizations. You have a broad mission, and then so much can fall under it, and there's a lot of work to do. That's certainly true of us. But I would say, Renee said a little bit about our origin stories. At that time, people were getting together to clean up lots, to stop, to end drug use in some parks where that was happening, to reclaim space for young people to play sports and hang out in a safe, fun, kid kind of way, and to not allow the clearing of the West End and gentrification that was happening elsewhere happen in the same way. So I think this holistic view of neighborhood health and wealth and well-being is that's our origin. And I would say today, and Renee has a history in environmental justice work, so I'll stop here soon. But I think today, a lot of the common concerns and in community meetings about development, it's like, what's the design of this building? Does it fit in with the character of the neighborhood? What's the cost of the building? Is it, are my kids going to be able to afford the rent or buy the home? What's the parking? Traffic's an issue. There's a lot of construction. How do we work with the city so that they notify us around street closures and rodents. So a lot of, I think our work is, we plan and it's very visionary work around like community power. And at the same time, I think some of the day-to-day concerns are very typical concerns that anybody would have in any place about the health, the comfort, the ease of access, being feeling like you fit in your own neighborhood, being concerned with the way the neighborhood changes. And then, yes, certainly environmental, what we might think of as more sort of typical environmental concerns, like, yes, people want open space, and good pest management, and also things like slower streets, right? How do we have the city actually put in extending curbs or road speed bumps? And anyway, René, anything you want to add?
Sure. Yes. So I think like Minnie was like touching some of the key moment in the history of DSNI and the neighborhood. I think DSNI also became like an inspiration for other organizations. I was a community organizer with a local organization in the area called Alternative for Community and Environment, and we were doing tours in the neighborhood and telling the youth and visitor the history of how DSNI helped to clean some of the contaminated site in the area. That inspired a group of youth to run a campaign for clean buses and on the MBTA, right? Like, so is one step was like taking stand on the land, cleaning those sites, making sure the city took responsibility, not just the city, but the neighbors, right? Like the community say, give us the power of eminent domain and we use it, and we will, like make new houses affordable in perpetuity for those who are under the community land trust model. And also we will create urban farming. We have like 10,000 square footage greenhouse. We own the land, we own building, and the food project run the programs for the community. So everyone who live in the community can have an access to have a plot to, like grows vegetable. That's beautiful, right? Like having, like walking on the neighborhood and seeing, like parcel with, like, or a piece of land that probably is like 3, 4, 5 parcels. I can't remember exact number. Probably Minnie knows that, in West Cottage and Brook Avenue, where every summer we have youth and community members, farming right there. So that's beautiful. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, like we partner up with the food project. A lot of those production was going to families that were, like in a difficult situation because of the pandemic. They lost their job, right? So the connection with the land is not just with the housing, also for producing local food. The organization has inspired other local nonprofit like ACE to run other campaigns, like these, how I was saying, to retrofit from some of the diesel buses, those in the 80s, 90s, I don't know if you remember, before they came the compressed gas that we have right now, right? Like, and I think the new generation probably is going to be electric, but like it's an history that DSNI is part of that, right? Like, yeah, I don't know, Minnie, anything else?
Well, I mean, the question, a robust committee that we have that's existed for many years is the Sustainable Development Committee.
Yeah.
And that's a board. It's a committee that's chaired by members of DSNI's board of directors. We have a 35-member community board. The Sustainable Development Committee, we have a set, that committee's come up with a set of criteria for what projects should look like and be. And sustainable development includes, the unit size being appropriate. Do we need more do we need more family housing? Do we need more young, youth, young person, college student housing, depending on the context, the project, the year. So that's a question, is just like unit size, the actual dimensions of bedrooms. There was a period when our work was really focused on cradle to career, doing a lot of work with the schools, a lot of education work. So having children's bedrooms that were big enough for a bed and a place to play and a desk to have dedicated homework space, like that was a criterion. And the Boston jobs policy numbers, which are now better around construction jobs for local development projects for women, for people of color, for Boston residents, our numbers within the Sustainable Development Committee, we request higher numbers historically than that. So we do, that's our Sustainable Development Committee, includes lots of different factors.
I'm curious if you could say something, and then I also want to remind everybody in the audience, we would love to have questions either for René and Minnie, or if you have questions of Megan and I, or you want us to pull up other maps, you can drop them in the chat at any time, whether you're tuned in from YouTube or Facebook, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But for René and Minnie, you talk about how both you have this really unique model of community control. You have the power of eminent domain, and then you're also trying to think about environmental amenities in the neighborhood. One of the things we look at in the exhibition is this kind of double-edged sword, right? Where we, of course, really want to bring a sense of kind of green justice to communities that have traditionally been put on the forefronts of environmental degradation. But at the same time, there's sometimes a fear about investment bringing displacement, right? And so, if you build a park, if you build nice infrastructure, if you build slow streets, is that going to lead to infill development, gentrification, and displacement? And so, how does the DSNI model kind of try to address some of those challenges? And even thinking historically, like what's different today than in the 1980s? When DSNI was founded, the city was still facing massive disinvestment in neighborhoods like yours. Today, the city's a site of major investment and accumulation, and land in Boston is extremely expensive and rents are very high. So how do we bring a kind of green investment that really centers issues and concerns around displacement or community transition?
I can try to, answer some of it's a big question, right? And I think, the other day we were discussing internally, right? Like DSNI, and also Minnie has been very instrumental in leading the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network that was created in 2000, I'm still in the 19, and 2016, basically to bring together community land trusts and encourage other communities to create community land trusts. And because I think in the conversation we have right now with the city, there are only 3 sites left in the Dudley Triangle that are owned by the city. One is owned by DSNI, and the other 2 are owned by the city. And after that, what's going to happen, right? Like, it's not going to be more land available. The other land probably is in the hand of private owners. They are maintaining the site. Is if they are paying taxes, we can do that much, except if we can offer them to buy it for a market rate value, right? And that's the question. We have 3 sites left in the Dudley Triangle. And after that, what? One of the studies that we have been thinking, and another community land trust in Boston, the Boston Neighborhood Community Land Trust, has been used is to acquire existing housing, existing building, and take those units out of the speculative market to make those affordable in perpetuity. Now, I think it's a question how much we have, how much funding we have to like maybe, like have a green building, right? Like that is more, in balance with, like the environmental. Those are questions that we're going to have to answer, in a few years, right? Like gas is becoming so expensive. So, how we can, like maybe, like transform those, based on oil, heating oil, to more clean energy, right? Like, so I think, for us, like we're in the process of, figuring out how we're gonna, sustain that work in the long term. And I think, acquiring existing housing, existing building is one of the strategies that we're exploring as a network. Minnie?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that seemed like a number of big topics. I think, yes, we're seeing gentrification in the neighborhood, in a way that of totally different conditions back then. Yeah, I think, I remember in school hearing some definition of gentrification that what I've remembered of it is that, gentrification isn't just it's just a natural process. Places get invested in, they get nicer, prices go up. What are you going to do? Like, gentrification involves local policies, cities, zoning boards, bureaucrats, decision makers, a system that is facilitating or easing or permitting or welcoming increased value of land, because that's where tax revenue comes from, and that funds city budgets. And so there's a rationale that makes sense that a city would want its land value to go up, but you see cities could be less permissive, right? Cities could charge higher taxes for certain types of development, and not give tax abatements or tax breaks or whatever. And I'm speaking generally here. So I think, just to say, and I'd like to revisit that, I think we should understand more when we're like in conversations around gentrification. What do you mean by gentrification? What do you mean? What do I mean? And because I think gentrification as like a city supported process is, I think that's how I understand it. So I think that when it comes to like, greening a place, or cleaning a place up, who is deciding they want to park there, who has a relationship with the city, if the city's doing the development, or the developer, if it's somebody else, who, if there's programming at a park, who's involved in that programming? What does the marketing look like? What's the purpose of it? And when is it happening? If urban farms and gardens come in, projects come in like that, well, are they coming in, or are they coming from within? So I don't think that like there's necessarily a thing as like too many parks or like too many urban gardens, and like this is too many, and now people are going to get pushed out. But it's how do we do it, and who is the we doing it? And this is vague in general, but there are just some comments on that. But yeah, I think, yeah, great questions.
I like that you framed it, who is the we, because that's really one of the central questions in our exhibition. We chose the title More or Less in Common to kind of provoke exactly that sort of consideration, right? When we think about the environment as something that people share, who is it? Who is really sharing it? Is it this kind of universal we, or is it, who's participating in it? I think actually this question from Mark, just reflecting on the uniqueness of DSNI's setup. Mark S asks, But the arrangement of DSNI as a community nonprofit actually owning the land seems to be a pretty unique, radical step. Are there other examples of such an arrangement? You all mentioned a few of the Boston examples. Are there others, either nationally or internationally, that are models for you, or that you are the models for, that were inspired by DSNI?
Yeah, I will say that there are other models, and actually, Minnie was just in a conference last week, National Conference of Community Land Trust. I think, like we get a lot of attention. DSNI get a lot of attention. One, because the eminent domain power that the organization has used historically, and now it seems like because that history, we're in a good place to bring other communities to the table, and kind of like support them and give some guidance and to create a community land trust. One of the newest community land trusts was in Chelsea, Massachusetts, with tierras enraizadas. But there are many other examples, and Minnie, you probably know more on those, especially coming from that conference last week.
I'll say I think there are about 230 community land trusts nationwide. Maybe it's 250. There are some in other countries around the world. There's a great resource. There's a Center for CLT Innovation, cltweb.org, maybe. And that they look at kind of the international CLT movement. The first community land trust in this country came about, I think, roughly 1969 in Albany, Georgia, which is a rural part of, I think, southwestern Georgia, southern Georgia. It was called New Communities Incorporated. They came out of the civil rights movement. It was a group of African-American families, individuals, people who came together to work in unison to control land and develop a community, develop a cooperative community to farm. They had plans to build schools. They were building their own housing and really carving out a self-determined community in this like giant amount of land in rural Georgia, and at the time of the civil rights movement. And I just encourage people to look up their story. They were accomplished many wonderful things, really inspired this movement. They're models for many of us, and they also suffered a lot hate attacks from their neighbors. They were systemically kept down by lending, redlining. So anyway, really fascinating story. They're really worth looking up. Shirley Sherrod and Charles Sherrod are two of the original CLT leaders in this country.
And I would add too, even from a longer historical perspective, in the show we try to look at how environmental management and landscape architecture are not just these like aesthetic professions or approaches to the city, but they've always had this political content. Olmsted, one of the things that really was unique about him was he saw parks as innovative because they were owned by the community. And certainly the second generation of landscape architects around the turn of the century were really interested in community control over land and housing. The Garden Cities movement, for instance, was very much centered around the literally owning things like housing and land in as a public amenity. So there's a way in which groups like DSNI are the sort of inheritors of a centuries-long movement around what we might today call like green development or community development.
Garrett, can I add too? I think, it's really interesting, this idea of community control of land. what does that look like? It's very concrete in that there's an entity that owns land, and the entity is governed by a community board. There are more abstract ways that we think about community control. And it's very challenging work every single day, task-wise, materially, and also conceptually, because we're trying to have land be for community use, but it's still owned by a private group. There are multiple communities within any community, and we're in a context of this is a colonized place, right? Like this is what we do here. Is this system, this American system, is that you own private, like land it's privatized and it's commodified. So we and new communities and the CLT movement has adopted an alternative to private property ownership by individuals. And it's not like it's not a perfect model either, right? So I just think, just to put that in there, that the context we're in is one of ownership of land in the first place, which is its own entire paradigm that has been extremely destructive.
Yeah.
I'm just going to jump in and remind people to pop their questions in the chat. We have one final one I'll read, unless there are any other that come up. But someone named Emily is asking if there's a policy at the state or city level that you're all excited about in terms of helping bring down barriers to community land trusts in Massachusetts. And if there isn't, what kind of things are you wishing to see get passed?
I can start that. So as I was saying before, what we're seeing here is, there's not a lot of vacant lots in the Boston area. I used to work in Somerville, and Somerville, is not a lot of also empty lots. So to acquire a lot to build affordable housing is becoming more and more difficult. We're seeing same pattern in the Roxbury area. As I was saying before, there's only 3 sites left and Triangle. So what we see as a new strategy is to acquire existing buildings, right? And here is the problem. We don't have a program at the state level that can support community land trusts. So we're in the process of contacting a state legislator and working together with them in creating a new program that can support community land trusts to acquire land if land is available, or acquiring existing buildings, existing homes to make them affordable in perpetuity. There are a couple of legislation that we're supporting. One is called the TOPA legislation, the right to purchase, give the opportunity to the tenants to partner up with an non-profit organization and have the right for refusal, meaning that if the landlord wants to sell, they have the options to acquire the building. So that will give a tool for tenants, and we have a couple of example in one of the community land trusts that is part of the Greater Boston Community Land Trust Network, partnering also the tenants approach to the organization Community Land Trust, and they work together in acquiring the building. So that's one tool that the legislators are discussing right now at the State House. The other is, so that gives us the power to negotiate with the landlord, and then where the money is coming from. It's another legislation, is the real estate transfer fee. So that also is a bill. There are 2 approaches. One is home rule petition, give those cities or towns who apply for home rule petition have the power to implement a transfer fee, or enabling legislation that any city and town in the Commonwealth can implement these tax or this fee. That will go to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund if the city has one, or they will create one if there no an existing one, and can be used to support community land trust. So those are the conversations that we're having with legislators right now. And like if someone is interested in to plugging in those any of those campaigns, please send us an email, DSNI.org. You can find our information there. Minnie, anything?
I just want to emphasize the first piece. So yes, we support tenants' opportunity purchase and the real estate transfer fee or local option for housing affordability. So please talk to your senators and reps about that if you are so inclined. Emphasizing the first piece, nationally, the federal government doesn't build public housing the way they used to. The way that they did do it, was flawed. There wasn't operation funds to keep it going, but there was there has been historically large investment in public housing and social housing. We still see it today through the mortgage system. But anyway, today, I think this statistic is right. I think for every single newly built affordable unit nationwide, 2 are lost. So meaning 2 units that have either a housing affordability restriction, that restriction expires and the unit gets sold off on the private market. Or perhaps that means that an existing a unit that is on the private market but is affordable, I can afford to live here. I have a landlord, that the rent goes up so much that it's no longer affordable. So for every single unit of affordable housing that is built, 2 are lost. So we already have a housing crisis, certainly in this state. This is the 3rd most expensive state to live in and across the country. And we're not seeing public investment in preservation of the existing housing. So we are in favor of building new housing, but we really need to stem the tide of housing unit loss to profit, to speculation. So we are developing a program and hoping to have like an amendment in the upcoming, a couple of upcoming bills at the State House, and really be doing a big advocacy push once we're really clear on the language and amendment number. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you, René, and thank you, Minnie, for sharing all of that with us. It's been so interesting to hear all the different moving parts. I'd spoken briefly with René about this a few months ago, and I didn't even realize how many different people and groups and how many different steps there are going into it. So I at least really appreciated hearing all of that. We are approaching the top of the hour, which means our time is coming to an end. So if there are any last minute dire questions, please drop them in the chat now. And if not, I am just going to share a little review form that would be great if people could fill out and let us know what we're doing well, what we're not doing well, what you want to see more of. And a final huge thank you to Minnie and René for joining us. This has been such an amazing conversation. We've been so lucky to have you with us for the evening.
Yeah, thanks both of you for taking time to talk with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Yeah, really happy to be here, and thanks for the folks who showed up. Appreciate it.
And we should say, like all of our public programs that are recorded, this video will be available right after the program on our website. We'd love to see everybody here at the Central Library. We're open 6 days a week with the More or Less in Common exhibition, which runs through the end of 2022. And if you're not able to make it in person, online at leventhalmap.org. So thanks for being here tonight, and thanks again to Minnie and René.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.